The Life Divine by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 24. Matter. He arrived at the knowledge that matter is Brahman. Taittiriya Upanishad. We have now the rational assurance that life is neither an inexplicable dream nor an impossible evil that has yet become a dolorous fact, but a mighty pulsation of the divine all existence. We see something of its foundation and its principle. We look upward to its high potentiality and ultimate divine outflowering. But there is one principle below all the others which we have not yet sufficiently considered: the principle of matter, upon which life stands as upon a pedestal, or out of which it evolves like the form of a many-branching tree out of its encasing seed. The mind, life, and body of man depend upon this physical principle. And if the outflowering of life is the result of consciousness emerging into mind, expanding, elevating itself in search of its own truth in the largeness of the supramental existence, yet it seems also to be conditioned by this case of body and by this foundation of matter. The importance of the body is obvious. It is because he has developed or been given a body and brain capable of receiving and serving a progressive mental illumination that man has risen above the animal. Equally, it can only be by developing a body, or at least a functioning of the physical instrument, capable of receiving and serving a still higher illumination, that he will rise above himself and realize not merely in thought and in his internal being, but in life, a perfectly divine manhood. Otherwise, either the promise of life is cancelled, its meaning annulled, and earthly being can only realize Satchidananda by abolishing itself, by shedding from it mind, life, and body, and returning to the pure infinite. Or else, man is not the divine instrument. There is a destined limit to the consciously progressive power which distinguishes him from all other terrestrial existences. And as he has replaced them in the front of things, so another must eventually replace him and assume his heritage. It seems indeed that the body is from the beginning the soul's great difficulty, its continual stumbling block and rock of offense. Therefore, the eager seeker of spiritual fulfillment has hurled his ban against the body, and his world disgust selects this world principle above all other things as an especial object of loathing. The body is the obscure burden that he cannot bear. Its obstinate material grossness is the obsession that drives him for deliverance to the life of the ascetic. To get rid of it, he has even gone so far as to deny its existence and the reality of the material universe. Most of the religions have put their curse upon matter and have made the refusal or the resigned temporary endurance of the physical life the test of religious truth and of spirituality. The older creeds, more patient, more broodingly profound, not touched with the torture and the feverish impatience of the soul under the burden of the Iron Age, did not make this formidable division. They acknowledged earth, the mother, and heaven, the father, and accorded to them an equal love and reverence. But their ancient mysteries are obscure and unfathomable to our gaze, who, whether our view of things be materialistic or spiritual, are alike content to cut the Gordian knot of the problem of existence with one decisive blow, and to accept an escape into an eternal bliss, or an end in an eternal annihilation, or an eternal quietude. The quarrel does not really commence with our awakening to our spiritual possibilities. It begins from the appearance of life itself and its struggle to establish its activities and its permanent aggregations of living form against the force of inertia, against the force of inconscience, against the force of atomic disaggregation, which are in the material principle the knot of the great denial. Life is at constant war with matter, and the battle seems always to end in the apparent defeat of life and in that collapse downward to the material principle which we call death. The discord deepens with the appearance of mind, for mind has its own quarrel with both life and matter. It is at constant war with their limitations, in constant subjection to and revolt against the grossness and inertia of the one and the passions and sufferings of the other. And the battle seems to turn eventually, though not very surely, towards a partial and costly victory for the mind, in which it conquers, represses, or even slays the vital cravings, impairs the physical force, and disturbs the balance of the body in the interests of a greater mental activity and a higher moral being. It is in this struggle that the impatience of life, the disgust of the body, and the recoil from both towards a pure mental and moral existence take their rise. When man awakens to an existence beyond mind, he carries yet further this principle of discord. Mind, body, and life are condemned as the trinity of the world, the flesh, and the devil. Mind, too, is banned as the source of all our malady. War is declared between the spirit and its instruments, and the victory of the spiritual inhabitant is sought for in an evasion from its narrow residence, a rejection of mind, life, and body, and a withdrawal into its own infinitudes. The world is a discord, and we shall best solve its perplexities by carrying the principle of discord itself to its extreme possibility, a cutting away and a final severance. But these defeats and victories are only apparent. This solution is not a solution, but an escape from the problem. Life is not really defeated by matter. It makes a compromise by using death for the continuance of life. Mind is not really victorious over life and matter, but has only achieved an imperfect development of some of its potentialities at the cost of others, which are bound up with the unrealized or rejected possibilities of its better use of life and body. The individual soul has not conquered the lower triplicity, but only rejected their claim upon it, and fled from the work which spirit had undertaken when it first cast itself into form of universe. The problem continues, because the labor of the divine in the universe continues, but without any satisfying solution of the problem or any victorious accomplishment of the labor. Therefore, since our own standpoint is that Satchidananda is the beginning and the middle and the end, and that struggle and discord cannot be eternal and fundamental principles in his being, but by their very existence imply labor towards a perfect solution and a complete victory. We must seek that solution in a real victory of life over matter through the free and perfect use of body by life. In a real victory of mind over life and matter through a free and perfect use of life force and form by mind, and in a real victory of spirit over the triplicity through a free and perfect occupation of mind, life and body by conscious spirit. In the view we have worked out, this last conquest can alone make the others really possible. To the end, then, that we may see how these conquests can be at all or wholly possible, we must find out the reality of matter, just as, seeking the fundamental knowledge, we have found out the reality of mind and soul and life. In a certain sense, matter is unreal and non-existent. That is to say, our present knowledge, idea, and experience of matter is not its truth, but merely a phenomenon of particular relation between our senses and the all-existence in which we move. When science discovers that matter resolves itself into forms of energy, it has hold of a universal and fundamental truth. And when philosophy discovers that matter only exists as substantial appearance to the consciousness, and that the one reality is spirit or pure conscious being, it has hold of a greater and completer, a still more fundamental truth. But still the question remains why energy should take the form of matter and not of mere force currents, or why that which is really spirit should admit the phenomenon of matter and not rest in states, velleities and joys of the spirit. This, it is said, is the work of mind. Or else, since evidently thought does not directly create or even perceive the material form of things, it is the work of sense. The sense mind creates the forms which it seems to perceive, and the thought mind works upon the forms which the sense mind presents to it. But evidently the individual embodied mind is not the creator of the phenomenon of matter, Earth existence cannot be the result of the human mind, which is itself the result of earth existence. If we say that the world exists only in our own minds, we express a non-fact and a confusion. For the material world existed before man was upon the earth, and it will go on existing if man disappears from the earth, or even if our individual mind abolishes itself in the infinite. We must conclude then that there is a universal mind, subconscious to us in the form of the universe, or superconscious in its spirit, which has created that form for its habitation. And since the Creator must have preceded and must exceed its creation, this really implies a superconscient mind, which, by the instrumentality of a universal sense, creates in itself the relation of form with form and constitutes the rhythm of the material universe. But this also is no complete solution. It tells us that matter is a creation of consciousness, but it does not explain how consciousness came to create matter as the basis of its cosmic workings. We shall understand better if we go back at once to the original principle of things. Existence is in its activity a conscious force, which presents the workings of its force to its consciousness as forms of its own being. Since force is only the action of one sole existing conscious being, its results can be nothing else but forms of that conscious being. Substance or matter, then, is only a form of spirit. The appearance which this form of spirit assumes to our senses is due to that dividing action of mind from which we have been able to deduce consistently the whole phenomenon of the universe. We know now that life is an action of conscious force, of which material forms are the result. Life involved in those forms, appearing in them first as inconscient force, evolves and brings back into manifestation as mind the consciousness which is the real self of the force, and which never ceased to exist in it, even when unmanifest. We know also that mind is an inferior power of the original conscious knowledge, or supermind, a power to which life acts as an instrumental energy. For descending through supermind, consciousness or chit represents itself as mind. Force of consciousness or tapas represents itself as life. Mind, by its separation from its own higher reality in supermind, gives life the appearance of division, and by its farther involution in its own life force becomes subconscious in life, and thus gives the outward appearance of an inconscient force to its material workings. Therefore, the inconscience, the inertia, the atomic disaggregation of matter must have their source in this all-dividing and self-involving action of mind, by which our universe came into being. As mind is only a final action of supermind in the descent towards creation, and life an action of conscious force working in the conditions of the ignorance created by this descent of mind, so matter as we know it is only the final form taken by conscious being as the result of that working. Matter is substance of the one conscious being, phenomenally divided within itself by the action of a universal mind. A division which the individual mind repeats and dwells in, but which does not abrogate or at all diminish the unity of spirit, or the unity of energy, or the real unity of matter. But why this phenomenal and pragmatic division of an indivisible existence? It is because mind has to carry the principle of multiplicity to its extreme potential, which can only be done by separativeness and division. To do that, it must, precipitating itself into life to create forms for the multiple, give to the universal principle of being the appearance of a gross and material substance instead of a pure or subtle substance. It must, that is to say, give it the appearance of substance which offers itself to the contact of mind as stable thing or object in an abiding multiplicity of objects, and not of substance which offers itself to the contact of pure consciousness as something of its own eternal, pure existence and reality, or to the subtle sense as a principle of plastic form freely expressive of the conscious being. The contact of mind with its objects creates what we call sense. But here it has to be an obscure, externalized sense, which must be assured of the reality of what it contacts. The descent of pure substance into material substance follows then inevitably on the descent of Satchidananda through supermind into mind and life. It is a necessary result of the will to make multiplicity of being and an awareness of things from separate centers of consciousness, the first method of this lower experience of existence. If we go back to the spiritual basis of things, substance in its utter purity resolves itself into pure conscious being, self-existent, inherently self-aware by identity, but not yet turning its consciousness upon itself as object. Supermind preserves this self-awareness by identity as its substance of self-knowledge and its light of self-creation. But for that creation presents being to itself as the subject-object, one and multiple, of its own active consciousness. Being as object is held there in a supreme knowledge which can, by comprehension, see it both as an object of cognition within itself and subjectively as itself, but can also and simultaneously, by apprehension, project it as an object or objects of cognition within the circumference of its consciousness, not other than itself, part of its being, but a part or parts put away from itself. That is to say, from the center of vision in which being concentrates itself as the knower, witness, or Purusha. We have seen that from this apprehending consciousness arises the movement of mind, the movement by which the individual knower regards a form of his own universal being as if other than he. But in the divine mind, there is immediately, or rather simultaneously, another movement, or reverse side of the same movement, an act of union in being, which heals this phenomenal division and prevents it from becoming, even for a moment, solely real to the knower. This act of conscious union is that which is represented otherwise in dividing mind, obtusely, ignorantly, quite externally, as contact in consciousness between divided beings and separate objects. And with us, this contact in divided consciousness is primarily represented by the principle of sense. on this basis of sense, on this contact of union subject to division, the action of the thought mind founds itself and prepares for the return to a higher principle of union, in which division is made subject to unity and subordinate. Substance, then, as we know it, material substance, is the form in which mind, acting through sense, contacts the conscious being, of which it is itself a movement of knowledge. But mind, by its very nature, tends to know and sense substance of conscious being, not in its unity or totality, but by the principle of division. It sees it, as it were, in infinitesimal points, which it associates together in order to arrive at a totality. And into these viewpoints and associations, cosmic mind throws itself and dwells in them. So dwelling, creative by its inherent force as the agent of real idea, bound by its own nature to convert all its perceptions into energy of life, as the all-existent converts all his self-aspectings into various energy of his creative force of consciousness. Cosmic mind turns these, its multiple viewpoints of universal existence, into standpoints of universal life. It turns them in matter into forms of atomic being, instinct with the life that forms them, and governed by the mind and will that actuate the formation. At the same time, the atomic existences which it thus forms must, by the very law of their being, tend to associate themselves, to aggregate. And each of these aggregates also, instinct with the hidden life that forms and the hidden mind and will that actuate them, bears with it a fiction of a separated individual existence. Each such individual object or existence is supported according as the mind in it is implicit or explicit, unmanifest or manifest, by its mechanical ego of force, in which the will to be is dumb and imprisoned, but nonetheless powerful, or by its self-aware mental ego, in which the will to be is liberated, conscious, separatively active. Thus, not any eternal and original law of eternal and original matter, but the nature of the action of cosmic mind is the cause of atomic existence. Matter is a creation, and for its creation the infinitesimal, an extreme fragmentation of the infinite was needed as the starting point or basis. Ether may and does exist as an intangible, almost spiritual support of matter. But as a phenomenon, it does not seem, to our present knowledge at least, to be materially detectable. Subdivide the visible aggregate or the formal atom into essential atoms. Break it up into the most infinitesimal dust of being. We shall still, because of the nature of the mind and life that formed them, arrive at some utmost atomic existence, unstable perhaps, but always reconstituting itself in the eternal flux of force phenomenally, and not at a mere unatomic extension incapable of contents. Unatomic extension of substance, extension which is not an aggregation, coexistence otherwise than by distribution in space, are realities of pure existence, pure substance. They are a knowledge of supermind and a principle of its dynamism, not a creative concept of the dividing mind, though mind can become aware of them behind its workings. They are the reality underlying matter, but not the phenomenon which we call matter. Mind, life, matter itself can be one with that pure existence and conscious extension in their static reality, but not operate by that oneness in their dynamic action, self-perception and self-formation. Therefore we arrive at this truth of matter, that there is a conceptive self-extension of being, which works itself out in the universe as substance or object of consciousness, and which cosmic mind and life in their creative action represent through atomic division and aggregation as the thing we call matter. But this matter, like mind and life, is still being, or Brahman, in its self-creative action. It is a form of the force of conscious being, a form given by mind and realized by life. It holds within it as its own reality consciousness concealed from itself, involved and absorbed in the result of its own self-formation, and therefore self-oblivious. And however brute and void of sense it seems to us, it is yet, to the secret experience of the consciousness hidden within it, delight of being, offering itself to this secret consciousness as object of sensation, in order to tempt that hidden Godhead out of its secrecy. Being manifest as substance, force of being cast into form, into a figured self-representation of the secret self-consciousness. Delight offering itself to its own consciousness as an object. What is this but Satchitananda? Matter is Satchitananda, represented to his own mental experience as a formal basis of objective knowledge, action, and delight of existence.